I know what they all think of me, neighbors, colleagues. If I had relatives and friends, they would think the same. But I don't have any relatives or friends. It's just Emma and Emil. Every morning when I leave the house and get into the car, Emma comes out to see me off. She hugs me, presses her lips to mine, pauses for a moment, then pulls away. A smile lights up her beautiful face, and she says, "Have a good day, love. I'll miss you." I look up and see that our 5-year-old son is already awake and waving at me from the nursery window. I raise my hand and wave back at Emil, then get in the car and drive away. Emma stands in the driveway until the car turns the corner. The workday rolls on as usual, hour after hour, but I know for a fact that Emma will call me to ask me what I want for dinner. No matter what I say, no matter what dish I order, it will be waiting for me, and it will taste better than the most expensive restaurant. Emma is a great cook. She does absolutely everything perfectly every time. And if I say I want to take her out to a restaurant tonight, I can be sure she'll support my idea. She supports all my ideas. By the time I get home to change, she'll be waiting for me. As soon as I'm ready to go out, Emma will be in the hallway, fully dressed and wearing makeup. I won't have to be stuck in the car for an hour waiting for her to come out. Emma isn't late. She doesn't dig in. She doesn't get cranky. She doesn't fidget for hours in front of the mirror. Surprisingly, she even puts on her clothes and makeup without looking in it. Emma hates mirrors. Emil will be in his room. He's so independent. We won't have to get a nanny. If we are late, he will brush his teeth, undress, and go to bed. He's independent, well-mannered, intelligent, and obedient. Just the way good children should be, right? If it's a regular home evening, Emma will greet me when I get home from work with a smile and love in her eyes, and the three of us will spend time together. Emil will show me the pictures he drew for me, tell me what he did during the day. We'll eat the dinner Emma made, and she'll wash the dishes and clean the kitchen while I watch TV. She won't let me know with a word or a gesture that she doesn't like the shows and movies I watch. And why would Emma do that when our tastes and interests are completely the same? She likes the same things I do. That goes for sex too. Emma wants me when I want her. No excuse for headaches or bad moods. My wife is willing to do what I ask her to do, and always willingly, happily. She always orgasms in bed and says I am the best man in her life, the only man. If I've had a rough day and I'm not in the mood to make love, Emma never thinks of pestering me with reproach or resentment. Emma is never angry with me and never pesters me. So, as I said, I know what people around me think of me. They're jealous of me to the point of toothache, not just because I'm rich, mainly because I, a fat man with a balding top and thick-lensed glasses, am loved by a beautiful, gorgeous woman like Emma. Because I, a man who blushes painfully in the company of strangers, has no wit, no friends, has such a wonderful family. And it wasn't always like this. Until a few months ago, I was lonely. Work, career was all I had left. All that usually leaves people like me, smart but ugly. Bullied by my classmates, beaten up by the local bullies. I worked like hell, from morning till night, without a day off. And in the end, my ideas, my firm made me a millionaire. I earned excellent money, could afford expensive things, cars, and vacations anywhere in the world. But I realized more and more that I did not feel happy. Money gave me neither charm nor attractiveness. The women I spent time with were with me not because they cared about me, needed me, cared about me, but because I paid them. Have you ever paid for another person to agree to spend time with you? If so, you should realize that such a situation is humiliating for both, the one who pays and the one who buys. I had thoughts of a surrogate, a child I could raise and who would love me with unconditional love, but I had no luck with that either. After getting a checkup, I found out that I was infertile, so I could forget about heirs. One day I found a certain site on the internet, closed, only for a narrow circle with a password and paid access. You could only get there for a lot of money. As you can imagine, this was not a problem. What was on that site? Magic, witchcraft rituals, extracts from ancient books, advice on how to cure yourself of ailments, acquire wealth, and become successful. I looked through this vinaigrette, wondering to myself, why do I need all this? And I wanted to close the page and forget about the existence of the portal, as suddenly I came across a way to find love, to organize my personal life. At first, everything I read seemed like a wild delusion, so implausible that I decided to try it. I won't describe the details of the ritual. It's multi-step and quite complicated. A mirror, a large floor-to-ceiling mirror, was the core, the most necessary element. And it was also necessary to formulate a clear intention, not just to make a wish to be happy, but to spell out in detail what exactly you need for happiness, or rather, who you need. I knew how to plan. And my imagination was fine too. I did what was required and waited, secretly scolding myself for my gullibility. I had been dealing with programming and computer technologies for decades, and suddenly out of the blue I got involved in a dubious adventure, bought into improbable promises, and a lot of money for it. I cursed myself until one morning when I woke up and heard a noise. I lived alone, and when I woke up, I never heard anything like that. But that time... From the kitchen came the clinking of dishes and a woman's voice, and then the sound of children's laughter. I left the room, smelling the coffee and pancakes, ran down the hallway, and froze on the threshold of the kitchen. A gorgeous, incredibly beautiful blonde stood at the stove with a spatula in her hand. A curly-haired blonde boy jumped down from his chair, ran up and hugged me. "Good morning, sweetie," Emma smiled. "Don't go barefoot. You might catch a cold. I'm making your favorite pancakes for breakfast." And so began my new life. The apartment where I lived before had to be sold because the neighbors were squinting, but it was for the best. I wanted to buy a house for a long time. The staff at work never knew anything about my personal life, so in the absence of friends and relatives, no one pestered me with questions. I had sorted out the paperwork for my wife and son. You can do anything with money. The first few months were a time of complete, boundless happiness. I was swimming in it, diving in, savoring every moment. I got everything I wanted, everything I never dared to dream of. Now, however, I don't know how to explain what's happening, and I can't tell anyone what's troubling me. First, there were the dreams. I'd never had trouble sleeping. I could fall asleep in no time at all when I dropped my head on the pillow, and 5-6 hours at most was usually enough to get a good night's sleep. Now everything has changed. I still fall asleep quickly, sleep until morning, but my sleep is restless. I am tormented by nightmares, which I do not remember, but which frighten me so much that I wake up in tears. And this is not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. Is it possible for an adult, almost 40-year-old man to dream something so terrifying that he sobs in terror like a child? When I opened my eyes, I gulped in air for a few minutes, unable to catch my breath. Something was pressing on my chest. My whole body feels so weak, as if I hadn't spent hours in bed, but had been working hard. The only thing I want to do is go back to sleep and get a good night's sleep, but the thought of having another nightmare makes me forget that desire. After dragging myself out of bed like Munchausen from the swamp, feeling broken and lethargic, I get into the day's rhythm, but I notice that every day I have to put more and more effort and less energy. I find it hard to concentrate on my work, and it's starting to slowly affect the quality. I'm missing important points, even though I was painfully attentive before. I'm forgetting appointments and becoming distracted. My co-workers squint at me, and I hear whispers behind my back more and more often. A week ago, I was getting dressed for the office and noticed that my pants were falling off even when I tightened my belt. I went to the mirror and looked at myself as if I were seeing myself for the first time. My face was gaunt, and there were dark circles under my eyes. My skin was pale and loose, like dough. I had really lost weight, but it didn't make me any less attractive. "Good morning, honey." Emma greeted me, and Emil rushed over to me, wrapping his chubby arms around me. I was glad to see them, of course, but for the first time, my wife's perpetual, glued-on smile caused a muffled irritation that I tried to suppress. "You'll notice I've lost a little weight." "You don't need it, my love. You always look beautiful, and I love you," she replied. It was exactly what I would have wanted to hear a while ago, but now I was expecting something a little different. "I haven't been sleeping well. I've been tired lately." Her smile didn't fade. "Let me make you something special for dinner, and your frown will be gone in no time." I had no appetite, so I didn't eat breakfast and hurried outside. The daily ritual of seeing me off to work did not please me. Even on the contrary, I hurriedly got into the car and drove away. The state of my health was still troubling me, and I had undergone a checkup 3 days ago. I was secretly afraid that the bad sleep and weight loss might be symptoms of some dangerous disease, but the doctor assured me that there was nothing wrong. "Obviously, you're overworked, hence the sleep problems. The fact that you're losing weight, in my opinion, is good for you. Take more walks, get more rest, try not to be nervous." That calmed me down a bit. I tried to get the bad thoughts out of my head. The doctor prescribed me some pills. I started taking them, and I think I felt better. The weather was great yesterday. It was finally spring with the warmth, the gold of the sun, the crazy chirping of the sparrows, and the first flowers of the mother maple. I suggested that Emma and Emil take a walk in the park, and they enthusiastically agreed. Emma and I walked down the alley, Emil scurrying around us. The park wasn't far from the house, and I told my wife that now that it was warm, we could come here more often, not cooped up like in winter. "Of course, darling. When you have time, we can all go out together." There was an old woman leading a small shaggy dog on a leash. I didn't look at them, busy talking to Emma, but I had to pay attention, because as Emil approached, the dog howled, took at its tail, flattened its body, and began to back away from the boy. The closer Emil came, the louder it howled. "Dusia, what are you doing?" The mistress was baffled. It's never happened before. She usually likes children. Meanwhile, Emma and I approached. The dog was shaking all over, baring its teeth and howling. The old woman and I looked at each other. An old woman in an old coat and a fat man with glasses. There was fear in the woman's eyes, and I didn't feel well myself. The impeccably beautiful Emma and Emil smiled serenely at the hysterical dog. Neither he nor she cared about the animal's reaction. It was as if they didn't notice anything unusual at all. I took Emil's hand and dragged him away. "Emma, come on." I shouted, and she followed me obediently. The old woman scooped up her pet and almost ran away. Why was the dog so frightened of Emil? I wanted to add "and you," but I didn't. It's an animal. Who knows what they have in mind, my wife said calmly. We walked on in silence. The walk through the spring park had lost all its charm for me. I thought about the similar reactions I'd seen to Emma and Emil. Our neighbors didn't have dogs, but several times I'd seen my wife frightened away by cats that happened to wander onto our property. I didn't pay much attention to it, just a silly cat. Once in a supermarket, we went with Emil to the aquarium where huge fish were swimming. As soon as he approached the glass, the fish clattered, splashed, as if they wanted to swim away from him. But there wasn't much room, and they floundered about, bumping into each other and flailing their tails. Emil watched and laughed until he had had enough. The boy didn't have friends like the other children, but that didn't bother him in the least. Emma had shown no desire to socialize with anyone but me. But now, this voluntary reclusiveness was no longer pleasing. It seemed unnatural and therefore frightening. Everything seemed to be the same as before, but my attitude changed. I looked at my family with different eyes. I didn't like what I saw. When we got home, Emma went to make dinner, and I locked myself in the bathroom, trying to calm down. I'd always known Emma and Emil weren't like any other normal people, hadn't I? Is it any wonder that animals can sense differences? It's not necessarily a sense of danger, maybe just a reaction to something different and unfamiliar. "Honey, dinner's on the table," my wife called out, and I put on a smile and went in. During the meal, I suddenly noticed the way Emil was eating. I had enjoyed watching him before, but today I saw things differently. Emma had put a large portion on his plate, almost as large as mine, and he ate as if he were doing a job, concentrating on the food, working methodically with knife and fork. He cut off a piece, put it in his mouth, chewed it, and took the next one. Like a machine, Emil tomped the food into himself without scattering it, without smearing it on the plate, without searching for better pieces, as children usually do. When he was done, the dishes were immaculately clean, and the table was just as clean. "Thank you, Mommy. Would you like some more?" I asked in surprise, and Emil immediately agreed. Emma smiled and went to the stove. Everything began again. Piece by piece, the second portion carefully moved from the plate to my mouth. Everything happened mechanically, as if Emil was eating not because he liked the taste didn't seem to matter much, but because I offered a refill. Didn't he feel satiated? Was he still hungry even though he had eaten so much? I felt nauseous, my appetite was completely gone. "You didn't like it?" Emma was upset. "Don't you think he eats too much?" His wife looked surprised. "But you always thought a child should have a good appetite. He shouldn't be cranky and picky. He should eat what he's given and ask for more." Emil raised his head and smiled. He was behaving as I expected him to behave. Everything was carried out exactly as I wished. Pushing my plate away, I left the table. Evening came. After my shower, I sat in our bedroom listening to Emma read Emil a bedtime story. I felt like the walls were closing in on me, that I was trapped here in this cozy, expensively furnished room and slowly going insane. Emma walked in and said, "Do you want to watch a movie for the night?" I remained silent. She sat down on the edge of the bed and ran her palm over my cheek. "You're tired? Do you want me to help you relax?" Her playful tone wasn't appropriate. Couldn't she see that I didn't care? No, of course she doesn't. She doesn't. "Let's go to sleep." "Sure." Emma agreed easily, without a shadow of offense. "Don't forget to take your pills. Can I get you some water?" A doll. A clockwork doll, that's what she is. No true life in her, which is why she's incapable of objecting, of getting angry, of rage. Of course not. She's just as you wanted her to be. What she was made to be? By who? It was wild and wrong, but for the first time I wondered, or rather allowed myself to wonder, who were they? Emma and Emil. Where did they come into my life from? This time it was impossible to fall asleep. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel calm. There was something like expectation dissolved in it, or maybe it just seemed that way to me. That's what happens when the table is set and the guests don't come. There's an impatient anticipation in the air. As is my custom, I tossed and turned for a long time without sleep. My wife lay quiet as a mouse beside me, and I thought she was asleep, but at one moment I looked at her, and, in the moonlight, saw that her eyes were open, and Emma was staring at the ceiling without blinking. The remnants of sleep were gone. Willy-nilly. I turned quietly to her and saw the same picture. Her body frozen, her face raised to the ceiling, her eyes wide open. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when I got up and left the bedroom. "Where are you going?" Emma asked. Her voice sounded clear and clear. Of course she was awake. "To the bathroom," I said roughly, and stepped out. But I didn't go to the bathroom. I went to the nursery. I wanted to make sure, and I did. My son was lying on his side. I moved closer and made sure his eyes were open. So sleep is not necessary for these creatures. They don't sleep to rest and regain their strength. Then what do they need? The answer was obvious. I spent the rest of the night in the living room. The thought of what happened in the bedroom when I fell asleep made me nauseous. That was the reason for the nightmares and the weakness and the nasty feeling of being drained of energy and life. I had created Emma and Emil, and I was their source of nourishment. I flashed images of them standing beside me at night, staring at me with unblinking ease. How their mouths blurred in greedy smiles, how they came closer to the bed, leaning over me lower and lower, greedily lapping at my body I was shivering coarsely, my palms were cold, and my head was a resounding emptiness. It was only by morning that I was able to pull myself together and make a decision. The next day, trying with all my might to keep outwardly calm, I went to work. When the boy ran up to me for a hug, I almost threw him off me, shuddering in disgust. Emma smiled a vinaigrette smile and told me the coffee was ready. I thanked her, noting with satisfaction that my voice hadn't wavered. Emma and Emil always went to the pool on Wednesday, so after waiting for them to leave the house, I immediately went back and packed everything I needed, some clothes, papers, some small things. Yes, I decided to run away. It seemed to me that it was the only way to save my life. When I got to work, I announced that I was giving everyone a paid vacation until the end of the week. I had to think about what to do next, where to live, and what to do so that Emma and Emil couldn't find me. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of the city and locked myself in, feeling the tension gradually let go for the first time in days. When I felt hungry, I ordered food and bought a bottle of cognac. It's not that bad, I told myself, savoring a meal that Emma had no hand in preparing. Things will get better. By evening, I was thoroughly drunk, so I fell asleep in my chair and had a nightmare. In the corner of the room, near the window, was a large, clunky closet, one of the sliding doors mirrored. The surface of the mirror resembled the surface of a dark pond, and the blackness was so thick it absorbed light like a black space hole. Both moonlight and lantern light fell into that bottomless, dark depth without reflecting, without leaving a glare on the surface. It was strange to look there. You were gradually drawn into the vortex. I was sitting in a chair, and at the same time, I was flying somewhere into the darkness, and it made me dizzy. After a while, I caught a movement. Vague at first, then more and more distinct. The mirror surface moved, rippled, as if it were water, and then a dark substance began to flow out onto the floor. Viscous as tar, it poured out of the mirror in a thick wave. But it did not spread, did not blur like a normal liquid. It was as if it were alive, pulsing and moving, and then its shape began to change. A few moments later, two dark figures, one large and one smaller, appeared in front of me. I do not remember the rest, for when I saw them, I fell deeper into sleep or lost consciousness. When I woke up in the morning, but I had not yet opened my eyes, I remembered the dream at once, and after that, the aroma of coffee, the clinking of dishes, children's laughter, a woman's voice. I was tossed up in my chair and my head spun around, ignoring the fact that it was buzzing with a hangover. Holding onto the wall, I crawled out into the tiny kitchenette. They were there. Emma stood by the stove. Emil was sitting at the table, but when he saw me, he jumped up, ran over, and hugged me. "Good morning, sweetheart," Emma said with an affectionate smile. "You had a little too much to drink last night. You shouldn't have done that. You need to take care of yourself. Take some aspirin, you'll feel better." She handed me a glass with a fizzy pill dissolved in it. I knocked the glass out of her hand. It fell to the floor and shattered. I rushed to the bathroom, barely made it to the toilet, and started vomiting. Later, pale, with disheveled hair, I went out into the hallway. The glass had broken, but it was okay. I cleaned it up and poured another. Where did you come from? I wheezed. I darted into the room, thinking Emma would leave me alone, but she followed. She stopped 2 paces away, her gaze as unfazed as ever. Emil walked over to her and took her hand. I thought you saw in the night. You left. We followed you. After all, we are family. We should be together. It's what you wanted. She spoke with confidence and clarity. Not a shadow of doubt was reflected on her smooth face. The words came out of her perfectly contoured mouth like colored peas. I pressed my palms to my temples. Who are you? The ones you want. The ones you've waited for and desired. The other worldly creatures stood staring at me. Behind the beautiful facades of their faces lurked a darkness that would soon drag me down with it. I want you to leave, I whispered. The smiles grew even wider. I'm sorry, darling, but you don't know what you're saying. You summoned us, and we can't go back as long as you're alive. Despite the smile, Emma didn't speak as affectionately as she usually did. It was more like a strict teacher reprimanding a kid who's in the bottom of the class. You knew what you were getting into when you called us. You were warned of all the risks, weren't you? I just didn't believe it. You wanted to believe, and you made a decision. To get a woman and a child who would love you and behave as you wished was tempting, and you agreed to all the terms, accepted them. But honey, you can't make a pact with us and then renege on your word. We fulfill our part of the bargain. We become the family you dreamed of. You have to fulfill your part. Nourish us, give us energy, and don't try to run away, especially since it's impossible. Emma came close and kissed me, as if wanting to soften her words. Emil also came closer and hugged us. Happy family. It's not that bad, honey. We love you, are ready to make you happy, and will always be there for you. At that moment, I cast a glance in the mirror. There was a reason Emma couldn't stand mirrors and wouldn't let me hang them in the bathroom, bedroom, or anywhere else, because she was reflected in them as she really was. Beside me, clutching me in their arms, their bodies clinging to me, the disgusting worm-like creatures wriggled. Their silhouettes only remotely resembled human figures, and their limbs were not 4, but 6, like those of the abominable insects. Long and thin as whips, they entangled themselves around me, pressing into my flesh. The shapeless skulls were lumpy. There were no eyes at all, and where the mouth should be, there were sucker-like trunks stretching forward. That's what they were, my beautiful wife and son. They sucked on me like ticks, nestled in like fish, drinking my soul day by day. I wanted to scream and couldn't. May was warm this year. Some desperate people had already gone swimming. But on the day of the funeral, the sky darkened from the very morning. Gray clouds, swollen with moisture, hung over the city. When the coffin was lowered into the grave, icy rain poured down, and people, spreading the wings of umbrellas over their heads, shivered, shuffling from foot to foot. The ceremony had to be shortened before the ground turned to mush. There were many people gathered, all standing with mournful faces, but no one was crying. No one was so close to the deceased that his departure caused real pain, became an irreplaceable loss, as one of the funeral organizers said. Colleagues, co-workers, partners were saddened. The deceased was a good man, and besides, now it is not clear what will happen to the company. It will die together with the owner, or someone will still stand at the helm. The sad action ended, and the crowd began to disperse. How could this happen? Shaking his head, said a gaunt man in an expensive coat. He was a clever man, talented. Something was going on with him lately. He didn't look like himself. It was as if he'd been replaced. Sihed Nina Sergeyevna, the secretary and part-time recruiter. Yes, he was ill, fatally. It's clear. You saw? He lost half his weight, dried up. He was fat, but now he's like a mop. Said loudly, a round-faced old woman from the accounting department. Why else would he go to the noose? Be quiet, Nina Sergeyevna shouted at her. Have some respect. I have all the respect in the world. She shrugged her shoulders. Just think about it. What did he lack? Plenty of money, a house like the Winter Palace, a firm of his own. I don't want to live. And he'd hang himself. The unexpected death of the boss shook the whole company, and the way he died. It's impossible to say where the information leaked out, but in the first hour, the news traveled through all the offices. The CEO was found hanging in front of a large mirror. Coincidence or not, he was turned to face it, as if he was looking at himself while dying. Suicides don't get a funeral, so the coffin wasn't brought into the church. The rain intensified and people picked up their pace, hurrying to get to the parking lot. Is everyone going to the wake? Nina Sergeyevna asked the accountant. All of us, she replied, referring to her colleagues. Poor guy, the accountant said with genuine sadness. He was so lonely. I wouldn't want to be buried by anyone but my subordinates. A couple passing by hearing this slowed down. He lived next door. He had a wife and a son, maybe adopted, I don't know, the woman said. She sounded like a gossipy gambler. They moved in the winter. Emma was as pretty as a picture. And when I saw them together, I thought it was no accident that such a pretty girl should be with such a... Her husband poked her in the side, and she hesitated, then added guiltily, he wasn't a very prominent man, and such girls look at the purse. Do you know where she's gone? Nina Sergeyevna asked. The chief sacredly guarded his private life, so she knew almost nothing about this Emma. She had seen her, like everyone else, once or twice. But when it came to the funeral, no one showed up to make the arrangements. The neighbors shrugged their shoulders in unison. I saw her last week, and there was a boy playing in the yard. Probably she left him, so he decided, suggested Nina Sergeyevna. Talking and making various conjectures, people reached the parking lot and began to sit down in their cars. Soon, the cars parted and the lot was empty. There was no one near the grave either, and only the rain kept pouring down. The drops fell on a large photograph leaning against one of the wreaths and slowly dripped down it, which made it seem that the man depicted in the picture was crying. Thanks for listening to this story. Put a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories.